All right, and this week we will be delving into the U.S. food and fiber industry. So in this video, we are going to talk about just what is the food and fiber system, how goods flow through that system. The section of the system we refer to as the farm sector, all the farm activities, changes to the modern farm sector post-World War II, the difference between productivity and profitability, and the value or equity of farms. So first off, what do we mean when we're talking about the food and fiber system? Well, the food and fiber system is the complex network of individuals and firms needed to produce agricultural goods and then transform them into products that consumers buy and to get them to consumers. So these are some different parts of the food and fiber system. We have not just farms and ranches who produce the goods, but we have equipment manufacturers, farm equipment, chemical manufacturers, companies that produce the agrochemicals that we use. We have transportation companies. We've got processors, food service, so the restaurants and hotels and all different ways that we get prepared foods. We have repair providers, so say mechanics who work on tractors or on processing equipment. We've got wholesalers, retailers, labor contractors, and then us as consumers. Okay, so this chart shows us the flow of goods from the farm level, up here where it says agriculture, through the system. So some of those goods, anyone who shops at the farmer's market knows that some of the goods go straight from the farmer to the consumer. But the bulk of agricultural products don't go that route. They go through this much more complicated route. So let's say that we're talking about wheat produced on a farm. So we have a farmer who's growing wheat. They're going to harvest their wheat and they're going to sell it to probably a broker or an assembler. Now, in this step, a broker is a company who buys, we'll say, wheat from all different farmers. They aggregate it, they bring it together. And then from there, it gets distributed either to food distributors themselves or it goes into manufacturing and processing. So if it goes to manufacturing and processing, we'll say for our wheat, that means like a mill. It's going to get milled into flour. And then that flour gets sold from the processor to, say, a wholesaler. And then from the wholesaler, it's going to go through some of these channels like grocery stores or specialty stores, or maybe it's going through the institutional market, so being sold to like a hospital or a school or something and being used there. And from there, it goes to the consumers. We do have up here a bit that goes to military use. And then we have this little offshoot here, government industries, including exports. And we'll talk about exports more in the next video. So we're going to start with the farm sector. When we talk about the farm sector, what we mean is the farms and ranches that are producing all of these products, and then the businesses that are involved with growing crops and raising livestock. So it's not just the farms and ranches themselves. We're talking about the seed companies and the fertilizer companies and the equipment manufacturer and the biotech companies who are breeding or creating genetically modified seeds. So that's all together the farm sector. Now, there have been a lot of changes to the US food and fiber system since World War II, so in the last 60 to 70 years. Many of those changes have to do with the structure of farms themselves in this country. The average farm size has more than doubled, while the number of farms that we have has decreased. So today, we have about 1.88 million farms in the United States. But in 1935, that number was more like 6.8 million. So that's a pretty big shift. And those farms are generally more specialized than they used to be. So they are more efficient. And some of that efficiency comes not just from the specialization, but from technological advances. So we've got advances in machinery. We've got these self-driving tractors now. We've got genetically engineered crops. We've got animal hormones such as RBST, which is a bovine hormone that's given to dairy cattle to help them produce more milk. And then we've got advancements in chemicals, so mostly pesticides and fertilizers and those kinds of things. Those are all advancements that have made farming more efficient in the US in those years since World War II. So this chart here shows us kind of that change in number of farms versus farm size. So this green line here, this shows us the number of farms in the United States over time. So you can see we're kind of peaking here around 1935. And then into the 2000s, we've really dropped down here. But the brown is the farm size. So you can see it's an inverse. Farms used to be a lot smaller, and today they're much, much bigger. The land in farms, which is the orange line, has stayed more or less constant since that period that we're talking about, since around World War II. Okay, so we also have some changes in the components that we use to produce agricultural goods. So we're going to talk about 4 components of agricultural production that are really important here. So to produce agricultural goods, we need capital, which is equipment and physical structures. So structures on the farm like barns or like packing shed. It's equipment like tractors or processing equipment, things like that. Things that hold their value and you don't use up. Then we have land. Pretty self-explanatory there. We need land to produce crops. We need labor. Some of that is hired labor, and some of it is self-employed, so the labor of the farmer who owns the farm or the rancher. Then we have materials. I think of materials as being like the consumables. So things that you use up and they go away and you have to get more of. So energy, which could be fuel or it could be electricity, seeds, services like repair services, chemicals like fertilizers and pesticides. You could include water in a material. You use it up and it goes away. The proportion in which we've used these 4 components has really changed over time. We already talked about land. The land use has changed over time. But let's look at the other 3. So right off the bat, the first thing I notice is this change in the orange line, which is labor. So 1950s, we've got a lot of labor going into agriculture, but where is it today? It's way down here. We're using less labor than we're using any other input here. We have the gray line, which is capital, and that's changed a little bit. We're using maybe a little less capital. That might be due to technological advances, larger equipment. So you need less of it to work the same amount of land. It's more efficient. And then the blue, materials. So we're using more of those consumable materials to produce food than we used to. So the bottom line here is that we're producing a lot more food, but it's on fewer farms, and those farms are larger. In fact, half of US farms produce just one commodity. Many of those are big commodity crops like corn and wheat and rice. We have the largest 10% of farms producing 75% of the value of production. The value of production is how we refer to the total value of all agricultural goods produced in the US. So 10% of farms are producing 75% of that. So productivity has really increased. We just looked at all of that. But has profitability increased? Well, the answer is looking like no. So this chart shows us the net income of US farms. And you can see how volatile it is. It really changes a lot. But in these last years, since the 1970s, our lows are getting lower, right, than they were before. And you can see this figure here, 2023, it's at the lowest that it's been in, 100 years or more. That's the profitability. It's how much farms are actually bringing in. So how does this work? What's the difference between productivity and profitability? Well, productivity is the level of output per unit of input. So let's look at an example. We'll call this guy Farmer Bob. Farmer Bob farms corn. He takes these inputs. He takes diesel fuel. He takes corn seed. He takes labor, his own labor and or hired labor, and fertilizer. Those are his inputs to produce his output, which is corn over here. So in 1980, we'll say that Farmer Bob used 100 gallons of diesel, 100 pounds of corn seed, 200 hours of labor, 100 pounds of fertilizer, and he produces 800 bushels of corn. That's his productivity, his level of output per unit of input, 800 bushels for all those quantities of inputs. Now, fast forward to 2020, we're using less fuel. So equipment has probably gotten more fuel efficient. So he's having to use less fuel. He's planting the same amount of seed. Prices probably haven't changed too dramatically there. He's using a lot less labor, half the labor. He's probably got better equipment, which means he has to use less labor. He's using a little bit less fertilizer. This might be due to crop varieties that are more efficient in their use of nutrients. And he's producing more corn. He's probably growing a variety that has a higher yield than they had in the 1980s. He's producing 1,000 bushels of corn versus 800 bushels of corn. And a bushel, by the way, is just a measure. It's one of the measures of how we look at agricultural goods in terms of yield. So he's increased his productivity, right? His level of output per unit of input is obviously higher. We've got fewer inputs here and we've got a higher output. So he has increased productivity. Now let's look at profitability. Profitability is the net farm income. And that's defined as the gross income minus the production expenses. So what is gross income? Well, gross income is like the total of all of the money that's coming into the farm. And part of this is what we call cash receipts. And I think of the word receipts as being like receiving. So any money that the farm receives from customers for purchasing goods. And then there's some government payments. He's farming corn, so he's probably getting some subsidies from the government. And then other farm income. And this could be income from maybe the farmer is leasing some land to another farmer, or maybe they are renting out some of their equipment, or maybe they are selling some of their time using their equipment. So they're going over to their neighbors and they're, say, using their tractor to till their neighbor's field for a fee. That would be an other farm income. And then production expenses. Pretty simple. It's just what it costs to run the farm. So what the farmer spends on all of their inputs, their fertilizer and their diesel fuel and their seeds and all that. So you have your net farm income, which is the difference between all the money coming in to the farm and the money going out to run the farm. So if we go back to Farmer Bob here, we've got some pretty big changes in the 40 years between 1980 and 2020. We've got the price of fuel has really gone up a lot. The price of labor has also gone up a lot. And the price of corn has gone way, way, way down. So in 1980, the value of corn, if you account for inflation, was around 10.59 a bushel. In 2025, that's 3.59 per bushel. I'm sorry, that should say 2020. In 2020, it's 3.59 per bushel. So in 1980, Farmer Bob's crop value was $8,472. In 2020, even though he grew more, his crop value is less than half. So he's not as profitable in 2020 as he was in 1980, especially when you account for the increases in the fuel price and the labor price. It's a really big difference. All right, so that was productivity versus profitability. And we have one more definition here, and that's equity. So how much something is worth is equity. With farm equity, kind of goes by this equation. Equity is your assets, the value of all of the things that you have, minus your liabilities. We'll explain what liabilities is in a second, but let's look at assets first. So assets are the value of the real estate assets, so the value of a farmer's land, plus the value of non-real estate assets. So the equipment, the value of the vehicles and the supplies that the farm owns. Then financial assets. And that's basically cash or what the farm has in the bank, minus the liabilities. So liabilities are debts that you owe to lenders or suppliers or customers. So all of your total value of everything that you have minus your liabilities, your debts, and that's the farm equity. So if we look at farm equity over time, how much a farm is worth, that's this blue line, the assets line. Or I'm sorry, that's not the equity, that's just the assets, not including the liabilities. It's really trended up though, especially since, let's see, like the 90s and the early 2000s. It's gone way, way, way up. Debts, the liabilities have remained around the same. So we can assume that farm equity has gone up. Now, why would that be? Well, part of it might be that farmers own more valuable machinery, but the biggest reason actually has to do with the article that you guys read last week about land. Land values, real estate values in the United States have quadrupled in the last 25 years. That's huge. That's a really short amount of time for values to go up that much. And part of the concern in that article is not just all of the parallel industries that take place with farming and all the value in those industries, but especially in California, where this number, this quadruple number, is probably higher, we have some issues with farmers whose profitability is lower than it used to be, but their land value is much higher. It becomes much, much, much more profitable for a farmer to sell their land rather than to hold on to it and keep farming it. So that's one of the big challenges that agriculture is facing in this country, and the agricultural economy. How do we deal with keeping farmland farming rather than selling it for the real estate value to developers who maybe want to build housing developments or shopping malls or business parks and that kind of thing? How do we keep farmers farming?